Hi there! Time for another Disney record review by me, the Big Bad Wolf. And it's yet another one of Disney's read-along book and audio titles, but this time it's an earlier style read-along. Take a look. Yep, the story of Little Red Riding Hood. This is one of the older ones from the 60s and early 70s. It had the entire story read by a single narrator without any additional voices, music, or sound effects. Normally on one side, and then songs relating to the story on the other side. But look at the cover artwork. No, it's definitely not the Disney style. It's instead drawn in a UPA sort of fashion. The studio behind Mr. Magoo and Gerald McBoing, in case you don't know. It's more or less a generic version of the story, complete with the usual violence and carnage we don't see in modern takes of the story, thank goodness. This title was produced and originally released in 1968, so it was made after Walt's death. But the strange thing is, if you remember, Disney actually made a Silly Symphony of the story in 1934, featuring me. They simply titled it The Big Bad Wolf, maybe because of how those pigs also played a role in it. And I guess Disney wanted to simply go for a straightforward version of the story here. You see, in the late 60s, Disneyland Records released some read-along book and audio sets of fairy tales done in a generic style, like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, Hansel and Gretel, The Little Red Hen, The Gingerbread Man, The Emperor's New Clothes, Rapunzel, and this one. I don't know why, maybe so they could compete with rivals like Peter Pan or Golden Records. He'd even go as far as writing original songs to go with these stories. When Disneyland Records changed their read-along style in the late 70s, they did not reissue or remake these generic fairy tale read-alongs, or even release them on cassette at the time, but they still stayed in print, even had the early version of the back here still. It says, "Children can see and read every word in the story in the book as they hear it on the record, plus music." Sometime in the mid-80s, Fisher-Price reissued a few of these read-alongs on record and cassette, probably something to go along with the phonographs and tape recorders they sold back then. Then in 1987, Disney Records discontinued all the vinyl read-alongs, now only offering them on cassette. As a result, all the older read-along titles that weren't remade yet and only available on record, like this one, went out of print. But those generic fairy tale adaptations finally got reissued and made the transition to cassette under Disney's Your Favorite Fairy Tales banner. They had new cover artwork, and the accompanying audio was redone for the cassettes, even including a new song on each one to replace the existing ones. Maybe if I find a copy of that and I get a good cassette recorder, I can do a comparison. But for now, let's listen to this original version. Once again, the whole thing is narrated by Robbie Lester, who did a pretty good job of these in many cases. Yep, it's the green label. The original label style.
This is a Disneyland original little long-playing record, and I am your story reader. I am going to begin now to read the story of Little Red Riding Hood. You can read along with me in your book. You will know it is time to turn the page when Tinkerbell rings her little bells like this.
Classic chime sound.
Let's begin now. Once upon a time, there was a little girl who had a new pair of red shoes. She also had a grandmother who was very fond of her. One day, grandmother made her a pretty
There's
red
a little
cape.
dog that keeps following her in each of the
Little girl liked
pictures.
the matching outfit so much that she wore it everywhere she went. Everybody called her Little Red Riding Hood. One day, Little Red Riding Hood was helping her mother bake cupcakes. They decided it would be nice if she took some to her grandmother, who had not been well. So, While the little girl was getting on her red hood, her mother put some cakes and a jug of lemonade into a basket and covered them with a clean white napkin.
The original story was cakes and wine. Ooh,
Then
look
Little
at
Red
this.
Riding Hood said goodbye and set
You
out
believe
to
in
her
that?
grandmother's house. On the way, she met a wolf. "Where are you going, little girl?" asked the wolf. "And what do you have in your
Looks
basket?"
a little like a fox, but with dark brown
my
fur.
grandmother's, said Little Red Riding Hood, to take her some cupcakes and lemonade. "Where does your grandmother live?" asked the wolf. "She lives in the yellow cottage with the white door."
The
and
mother
two
forgot to
maple
warn
trees
Little
in
Red
front,"
Riding Hood about
she said.
talking to
"It's on
strangers
the
and all
other
that
side of
jazz.
the forest." "I see," said the wolf. "It was nice meeting you, my dear." And with that, he left Little Red Riding Hood and turned down another path. The little girl had no way of knowing that the wolf had taken a shortcut. He wanted to reach the grandmother's house ahead of her. When he got there, he knocked on the door. "Who is it?" asked the weak voice from inside the house. "It is your granddaughter. I have brought you some cakes and lemonade."
Only a voice by Robbie Lester could do that.
Nice. Just pull the latchstring and come in, dear, said the grandmother.
She does a pretty convincing grandmother voice.
Opened the cottage door and came in. In a moment, he had swallowed the grandmother.
I didn't bother to eat her. In my version, I just locked her in the closet.
Little Red Riding Hood, in the meantime, had stopped to pick some of the lovely flowers that grew along the path. When she had a nice bouquet, she began walking again, and soon came to the little cottage with the maple trees. She knocked on the door, which was not quite closed. "Who is it?" asked a voice from inside. "It is I, Little Red Riding Hood. I have brought you some cakes and lemonade." "Come in, my dear," said the
I
wolf
just
in his
responded with,
sweet
"Come
voice.
in."
So, Little Red Riding Hood entered the cottage. She put her basket on the table and went over to the bed. "How are you feeling, Grandmother?" she asked. To Little Red Riding Hood, her grandmother looked very strange indeed. "Much better, my dear."
I said, "Not so, Aunt dearie."
"Grandmother, what big eyes you have," said Little Red Riding Hood. "The better to see you with, my dear," was the reply. "Grandmother, what big ears you have."
Not like when she asked, "What a big nose you got."
"The better to
And I
hear
went,
you with,
"All the
my
better to."
dear," said the wolf.
Yep, I can still do a pretty good Jimmy Durante imitation.
Red Riding Hood was suddenly trembling. "And what big teeth you have," she said in a small voice. "The better to eat you with," said the wolf.
I made it more interesting with,
Out of the
"You
bed.
you ain't seen the half of it, dearie."
Red Riding Hood was quicker. Before the wolf could catch her, she ran out the door of the cottage. The wolf ran after her. Just then, a woodman,
Yeah,
who had
he doesn't
been
eat her like in some of the
saw
really
what was
old
happening.
versions.
The woodsman chased the wolf out into the forest and killed him.
Ugh.
Then he
It's
cut him
woodsmen
open.
and hunters like them that
Off
are
the
making
grandmother,
wolves an
safe
endangered
and sound.
species in North America.
Oh, what
And he
a
actually
relief,
shoots him with a gun, too,
and gave Little Red
instead
Riding
of
Hood a
using an
hug.
axe or whatever.
Then Little Red Riding Hood, the grandmother, and the woodsman all went into the house and had a party with the cakes and lemonade. Little Red Riding Hood was very careful after that about speaking to strangers.
Well, that's the story. As I said before, in many cases, the whole story would only be presented on the first side of the disc. A handful of releases did continue the story onto the second side, but not in this case. I still think I did a better job performing in this story than the wolf. Here, I didn't even get killed. But then again, there was no woodsman or hunter in our version, thank goodness. And as I said, this version of the story was rather generic. Almost like how Tex Avery criticized it in his Red Hot Riding Hood. Well, at least it didn't start with Robbie Lester saying, "Good evening, kiddies," or referring to the wolf as a mean old wolf, or all that jazz. Plus the pacing was good, compared to the Golden Book video version, 1985. Or when Peter Pan Records adapted into read-along format and made it go very quickly, with the dapper wolf seen there. But here's where things get a bit more interesting. Now we have the songs to listen to. They fundamentally retell the story, but still interesting we actually went and did this for these generic fairy tale read-alongs. So let's listen.
This is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. It's all about some things that are bad and also some things that are good. Little Red Riding Hood was very good.
Duh.
And the big bad wolf
Not me.
was very bad.
You don't call me the big bad wolf for nothing.
One day when she was on her way to see grandmother in the country, the wolf made a plan to beat her there, to meet her there and even eat her there. He swallowed grandma with a mighty bite and dressed in her nightie with a wicked grin. He waited for Red Riding Hood to walk right in.
And in she came with goodies she had cooked, but she stopped when she saw how funny Grandma looked, with great big eyes and great big ears and sharp white teeth. And when the wolf jumped out of bed, he chased her, but she stayed ahead. A woodsman who was passing by trapped the wolf on the fly and saved Grandmother Red Riding Hood too. It's a story almost too good to be true.
Yeah.
This is the story of Little Red Riding Hood. It's all about some things that are bad and also some things that are good. Little Red Riding Hood was very good. And the big bad wolf was very bad.
Now here's the other song, Little Red Riding Hood's Hood.
Little Red Riding Hood's little red shoes were red as a red, red rose. Little Red Riding Hood's little red shoes were red as a red, red rose.
She loved to wear them night and day.
They made her feel so bright and gay.
Not that kind of gay. And this wasn't the 60s.
Little Red Riding Hood's little red hood was red as a cherry tree.
Sounds kind of like a song from a 60s Rankin Bass cartoon of some sort.
Cherry tree. The hood was small but fit just right.
She loved that hood with all her might.
Little Red Riding Hood's little red hood. Did you ever wonder how she got her name?
Well, it's pretty clear to see. Not that I'd want to. At least the song style does kind of fit with the illustrations, though. A flat UPA style, that is.
Did you ever wonder how she got her name?
I already know.
Well, with little red shoes and the little red hood, even you could be Red Riding
Now all that's missing is the Rankin Bass logo theme playing after that. Alright. Pretty interesting, though. Those songs do sound a bit dated. That's probably why they simply came up with new songs for the 1987 remakes of these. Plus, beginning sometime in the mid-80s, the new read-along book and audio sets generally had one song each. Like that great Mouse Detective read-along. Or even when they remade the Winnie the Pooh read-alongs in the 90s. But I have always wanted to share one of Disney's more obscure read-along titles. I figured the story of Little Red Riding Hood would have been perfect. Yeah, I didn't get much done for Valentine's Day with the snow, and not much stuff for furries. Unless it's J.C. Chezet and the Scooby-Doo Valentine. But at least Anthro New England will be in a couple of weeks, so watch for me there.